My name is Melissa, and I have always been the kind of person who worked for every single grade I earned, the kind of student who color-coded her notes, who spent hours creating flashcards and staying up late to make sure I didn't just memorize material but actually understood it. And while I wasn't some genius who got perfect marks without trying, I took pride in knowing that every grade reflected real effort, and it gave me a sense of identity, a sense of worth, and honestly, security in who I was. My best friend, Natalie, couldn't have been more different. Natalie was the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into, who laughed loud, smiled easily, got away with breaking little rules because everyone thought she was too charming to punish, and even teachers who should have been stricter would let her hand things and later laugh off her excuses, because Natalie was just that kind of person, irresistible to most people. Since middle school we had been inseparable, an unlikely pair because I was studious and focused while she was carefree and spontaneous, but I told myself that's why we worked as friends, because she loosened me up and I grounded her, or at least that's what I thought. When junior year started, I noticed Natalie talking more about her future, about college applications, about wanting to get into a strong program that would look good on paper, which was unusual because academics were never her thing. But I was proud that she was finally caring about it. She started coming over to my house to study, and even though most of the time she was lounging on my bed scrolling on her phone while I explained concepts, I convinced myself it was still progress, that she was trying, that she was letting me help her, and that felt nice. But then came chemistry class. We had our first big test of the semester, and I had studied for weeks. Natalie hadn't cracked her book, at least not in any serious way, and yet when the results came back, I had scored a 92, and she scored a 95. She laughed and said maybe she remembered more from class than she thought, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling in my stomach, because how did she manage to outscore me when she had barely prepared? I told myself not to overthink it, but then history class happened. During an exam, I felt something strange, a shadow, a presence too close, and when I shifted my eyes, I saw Natalie leaning ever so slightly, her eyes flicking to my paper. My heart dropped. I froze mid-sentence, pencil shaking in my hand, because it hit me that Natalie, my best friend, was copying my answers. I tried to angle my arm to cover my paper, but she noticed, and afterward, she acted like nothing happened. That night I replayed it over and over, asking myself if I had imagined it, if maybe I was being paranoid, but the image of her eyes scanning my answers wouldn't leave me. So I decided to test her. On our next math quiz, I intentionally put one subtle mistake in a problem, misplacing a decimal just slightly, something small enough that a teacher wouldn't notice right away but specific enough that if Natalie copied it, I'd know for sure. When the graded quizzes came back, my heart pounded as I checked hers. And there it was, she had the exact same wrong answer, down to the misplaced decimal. That was when the denial collapsed, and I realized the truth. Natalie had been cheating off me, and that probably explained her suspicious chemistry score, too. My stomach churned with betrayal because this wasn't some random classmate, this was the person I trusted most, the person I considered like a sister. I wanted to confront her, but every time I pictured her laughing, brushing it off, or worse, turning it around on me, I froze. What if she got angry? What if she told people I was lying? Still, I thought maybe it would stop, maybe it was just desperation, but instead it escalated. Every exam, every quiz, I could feel her eyes boring into my paper, waiting for me to finish so she could copy. I dropped hints, saying things like, "You should really study more," or "It's not good to just wing it," but she only laughed, tossing her hair back and saying, "Relax, Mel, I've got this," as if I was the one being ridiculous. Meanwhile, teachers started praising us together, calling us a pair of high achievers, saying things like, "Melissa and Natalie, you're both excellent students, such great examples," and every time, I wanted to scream the truth, that I was doing the work while she was stealing. But I stayed silent because I didn't want to look like a bitter friend or worse, a snitch. Then the midterms came, the ones that mattered most, and I realized I couldn't let this go on. The night before, Natalie came to my house under the pretense of studying, but she barely glanced at her notes, asking me to explain things she should have learned weeks ago, and I saw it clearly, she had no plan to actually study. She was counting on me, counting on copying. During the midterm, I positioned myself carefully, shielding my paper with my arm, angling my chair, doing everything I could to make sure she couldn't see. She tried, leaning and craning her neck, and when she realized I wasn't letting her, she glared at me, not with her usual playful smirk but with something colder, sharper, angrier, and in that moment I knew she wasn't just annoyed, she felt entitled. When the grades came back, I had a 94. Natalie had a 67. She cornered me after class, her voice low and sharp like a knife. "Why didn't you let me see? I needed that grade." My mouth fell open because she wasn't even pretending anymore, wasn't even ashamed, she was angry at me for not letting her cheat. For the first time, I saw her not as my best friend, not as the girl who had been with me through everything since middle school, but as someone who had been using me for months, maybe longer, without caring what it might cost me. And as I walked away, my chest tight and my thoughts racing, I realized something terrifying. If Natalie was willing to cheat off me so openly, if she could betray me like that without guilt, then maybe this wasn't just about school. Maybe she was capable of betraying me in bigger ways too. And I had no idea just how far she was willing to go to keep her secret safe, but I was about to find out, because Natalie wasn't finished, and the next move she made would drag me into something I never saw coming. After that confrontation, things between me and Natalie shifted in a way that was almost impossible to ignore. She didn't talk to me in the same easy way, her laughs sounded forced, and the effortless comfort we once had was gone. Instead, she carried this sharpness in her tone, like every word was loaded with unspoken resentment. I thought maybe she'd get over it, maybe she'd study harder and stop relying on me, but the exact opposite happened. She started acting like I had betrayed her, like I owed her something, and it twisted my stomach every time I saw her glaring at me in class when teachers handed out tests. It wasn't just anger, it was calculation. She started hanging around with other people more, girls from our class who weren't really her friends before, and I had the uneasy feeling she was talking about me, spinning the story in a way that made me the bad guy. Sure enough, whispers began circulating. People I didn't even talk to were suddenly looking at me strangely. Then, one day at lunch, I overheard a girl from another table telling someone else, "Yeah, apparently Melissa won't let Natalie copy her notes anymore." Selfish much? My blood ran cold. She was telling people. She was painting me as the bad friend, the selfish one, the gatekeeper of knowledge. And no one was questioning her version of events, because she was Natalie, everyone liked her, everyone believed her charm. I wanted to scream that she was lying, that I wasn't stopping her from learning, I was stopping her from cheating, but how could I say that without sounding like I was exposing my own best friend to the teachers? It felt like I was trapped, cornered, with no way out. I tried to keep my distance, thinking maybe the storm would blow over, but Natalie wasn't going to let it. She started making little digs at me in front of others, subtle but sharp enough to sting. "Melissa's too busy being perfect to have fun," or, "Not everyone can be a robot like you, Mel." People would laugh, not realizing the venom underneath, but I did. And the more she said things like that, the more isolated I felt. But the real blow came during English class. We had an essay due, a big one that was worth a significant portion of the grade. I turned mine in early, proud of the work I'd done, only to find out later that Natalie had turned in an essay nearly identical to mine. The structure, the arguments, even some of the phrasing, it was mine. My essay. My words. So I kept quiet, but I started documenting things, every time she tried to cheat off me, every suspicious look, every assignment that seemed eerily similar. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but I knew I needed proof. Because something in me shifted that day, I stopped seeing Natalie as my best friend at all. She had become something else entirely, someone dangerous, someone I had to protect myself from. But Natalie must have sensed what I was doing, because her behavior escalated. She stopped even pretending to be my friend. Instead, she started actively undermining me. I'd overhear her telling people I was competitive and jealous. She spread this story about how I hated when she succeeded, how I couldn't stand that she was finally doing well in school, twisting the narrative until I was the villain in everyone else's eyes. And the worst part? People believed her. I felt the shift in the way classmates treated me, less friendly, more distant, suspicious even. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, I was called into the principal's office. My stomach dropped as I walked in and saw Natalie already sitting there, her arms crossed, looking every bit the innocent victim. The principal gestured for me to sit, his expression grave. He told me there had been a report of academic dishonesty, that someone had accused me of allowing another student to cheat off my tests. My ears rang, my vision tunneled, and it took me a moment to process what he was saying. Natalie had flipped the story. She had told them I was the one letting her cheat, that I was the one helping her all along. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain that I had been the one being cheated off of, but Natalie sat there, tears in her eyes, whispering about how hurt she was that I was trying to blame her. The principal's expression stayed neutral, but I could feel the weight of suspicion pressing down on me. When I left that office, I wasn't just scared, I was furious. Natalie had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She wasn't just cheating anymore, she was trying to destroy me, to drag me down with her so she could save herself. And I realized that if I didn't do something, if I didn't find a way to prove the truth, she might succeed. But as much as I hated to admit it, Natalie was smart in her own twisted way. She knew how to play people, how to manipulate teachers and classmates alike, and she wasn't going to stop until she had me exactly where she wanted me. I didn't know how yet, but I made myself a promise as I walked out of that building with my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I was going to expose her. I was going to show everyone who she really was. Even if it meant burning our so-called friendship to the ground. The next few days were unbearable. I couldn't walk down the hall without seeing Natalie smirking at me or whispering to someone just as I passed by. It was like she had declared war, and I was the target. I tried to keep my head down to avoid giving her anything to use against me, but nothing worked. The whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle mockery followed me everywhere, and I realized just how cleverly she had set it up. She wasn't just cheating, she was orchestrating a campaign against me. A campaign to make sure everyone saw me as the problem while she remained untouchable. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I spent that night combing through my notes, my old assignments, my emails to teachers, anything that could prove what had actually happened, because I couldn't let her get away with this. I knew I needed to be smart. She was manipulative, but she wasn't infallible, and everyone has a weakness. I just had to find hers. The next morning, I noticed her leaving the cafeteria with a notebook in her hand, and it wasn't her own, it was mine. She must have snatched it when I had left my bag unattended the day before. My heart pounded because I realized this was bigger than I thought. She had access to everything, and it wasn't just tests anymore, it was essays, homework, notes, anything I did, she could copy and twist against me. That's when the idea came to me, I would set a trap. I would create a test answer sheet that looked perfect but included deliberate subtle mistakes, the kind that a teacher or anyone paying attention would notice but that would be invisible to someone copying blindly. I spent hours crafting it, every detail checked and double-checked. I had to make sure it looked completely normal while hiding the trap for Natalie. I left the sheet on my desk at home and waited for her to come over. Like clockwork, she showed up pretending to study. She lounged on my bed scrolling her phone, asking me to explain a problem I had already solved. I felt my blood boil, but I stayed calm because I knew she would come for the answers eventually. I left the answer sheet on my desk and walked away, pretending to get a snack. She glanced at it almost immediately, and I could see the way her eyes lit up. She grabbed it as if it were gold. I didn't say a word, just watched from the hallway, my heart racing. Minutes passed, and she left with a quick, "Thanks, Mel, I owe you one." The words tasted like poison. The next day in class, the teacher returned our graded quizzes. When she handed Natalie's back, I felt my pulse spike. The teacher's brow was furrowed. She said something about checking the answers again because some didn't make sense. Natalie looked confused and a little flustered. I tried not to smirk because I knew she had fallen into my trap. Some of the numbers were wrong enough that she couldn't justify them. The day I finally confronted the principal with my evidence was terrifying. Natalie was there. She smiled at me as if she hadn't been the source of months of stress, manipulation, and theft. The principal listened patiently to everything I had to say while Natalie sat quietly at first. Then she started to protest subtly, trying to undermine me. She said I was paranoid, overreacting, that I was creating drama, that I had no proof. I clenched my fists but stayed calm. I laid out every piece of evidence systematically, every copied assignment, every suspicious note, every photograph of her sneaking glances, every pattern of her copying my work. I watched the principal's expression change slowly from skeptical to concerned. Finally, he nodded. He said this was serious, and he would investigate further. Natalie paled. Her friends around her shifted uncomfortably. The whispers I had feared months ago seemed to turn as the truth became undeniable. I felt the first glimmer of relief that finally things were turning in my favor. I was ready for the next move because I knew she wouldn't stop, and when she did, it would be brutal. After presenting all the evidence to the principal, I thought maybe finally I could breathe a little, but Natalie didn't give up. She became colder, more calculating. She started showing up at school early or staying late just to hover near me, pretending to do homework but clearly watching my every move. I realized quickly that nothing was safe if she wanted it enough. She even started messaging me late at night, asking to study or to go over notes, but I ignored most of her messages. Every time I did, she would drop little comments in class like, "I guess some people just don't want to help their friends," meant to look innocent but loud enough for others to hear. I felt trapped because the teacher's investigation was still ongoing, and I knew she was trying to sway people's opinions against me. I started noticing her subtle manipulations. She would comment on my posts on social media, pretending to be concerned while planting seeds of doubt in my friends' minds. She even started showing up in places I didn't expect, like the library or the cafeteria, pretending coincidence but clearly watching me. I had to be vigilant. I couldn't let her get another advantage. I confided in my older brother about what was happening, and he suggested I gather more concrete proof. Every day from then on, I kept a detailed log, screenshots, photos of notes, timestamps of when she was near my desk, everything meticulously organized. I knew that when the principal or teachers confronted her, I couldn't just rely on my word. I needed undeniable proof. The tension became exhausting, but I felt like I was preparing for a war. I had to outsmart her before she could do any more damage. Then, one afternoon, she made her move. I had left my history project on my desk for a moment while I went to the printer. She was there within seconds, picking up my folder and rifling through it. My heart raced. I had already set up my trap. I had prepared a fake set of answers and fake notes, deliberately containing subtle mistakes, for exactly this moment. I watched from the hallway as she copied down everything she could. The malicious thrill in her eyes was unmistakable. She thought she was winning again. I waited until she left, then grabbed the folder and copied every page I had planted in my trap. She didn't notice. She thought she had scored another victory. I started putting together a complete report, including timestamps, screenshots of her copying my answers, and the deliberately wrong notes she had taken. The next day, I requested a private meeting with the principal, bringing everything in my folder along. When he examined the documents, his eyebrows shot up. I explained the pattern, the deliberate mistakes, and how every test, essay, and assignment she had turned in mirrored mine far too closely for it to be coincidence. The principal looked at Natalie and asked for her side. Weeks passed. At school, people looked at her differently, questioning her words and charm, while I stayed quiet, observing. I realized the dynamic had shifted in my favor. I could finally study and live without constantly worrying about what she might do next. I still felt a pang of betrayal when I thought about everything, but it was accompanied by a strange sense of empowerment because I had survived something toxic and emerged stronger. I learned how destructive manipulation can be, how quickly trust can be broken, and how important it is to document and stand up for yourself. I also learned that sometimes the person you think is your closest friend can become your greatest adversary, and that strength comes not from avoiding conflict but from confronting it head-on. The day the school board called both of us into the meeting felt like walking into a storm. I clutched my folder with every piece of evidence I had gathered, my heart pounding and my palms sweaty, but I knew I couldn't back down. Natalie walked in ahead of me, her usual charm plastered on her face, but it was thinner than ever. I could see the tension behind her eyes. She knew the game was up. The board asked for a statement from both of us, and I went first. I calmly explained everything from the start, how she had copied my homework, tests, essays, even my class notes. I showed the timeline, the screenshots, the deliberate mistakes she had mirrored. I laid it all out methodically, step by step. When it came to her turn, Natalie tried her charm. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. She tried to claim coincidence. She spun lies about being stressed and confused. She tried to say I was overreacting and that she was unfairly accused. She attempted to play innocent, but her rehearsed act was falling apart. Every question the board asked her exposed more contradictions. Every point she made only reinforced my evidence. By the end, Natalie's confident facade cracked. She started to fumble. She couldn't explain the deliberate errors, and the principal who had been supporting my case sat quietly taking notes. Finally, the lead board member looked at Natalie and said the evidence presented was extensive and the pattern undeniable. She had engaged in repeated academic dishonesty and manipulation. Her actions had unfairly targeted another student. The board turned to me and asked if I felt there was anything else to add. I simply said I wanted the truth to be clear and for no one else to be unfairly blamed. Natalie tried one last gasp at twisting the story, but the board held firm. They said the investigation would result in disciplinary action and that my records would reflect the documented misconduct. I felt a wave of relief and exhaustion crash over me. The tension I had carried for months began to lift. Natalie didn't say a word as she stormed out, and I realized something important. The friendship I thought we had was gone. It had never been real in the way I imagined it. Trust had been replaced by manipulation, and I could never go back to believing otherwise. At the same time, I felt stronger. I had learned to protect myself, to gather evidence, to confront authority, and to stand up even when someone I loved betrayed me. I started walking back to class and noticed people giving me curious looks. Some whispered, but I ignored them because I knew the truth was on my side. Weeks later, Natalie's social standing began to crumble subtly. She became isolated. She tried to charm people, but the warmth was gone. Her manipulations were exposed to those who mattered, and I could finally focus on school without constantly worrying. I still felt a pang of betrayal when I thought about everything, but it was accompanied by a sense of empowerment. I had survived a toxic situation and emerged stronger than I knew I could be. I started focusing more on my own work, on achievements that were truly mine, and on rebuilding friendships that were genuine. I learned how destructive manipulation can be, how quickly trust can be broken, and the importance of standing up for yourself. I also learned that the person you think is your closest friend can sometimes become your greatest adversary, and that strength comes not from avoiding conflict, but from confronting it head-on. Months later, I received my final grades. My GPA reflected all the hard work I had put in. Nothing had been lost because I had fought for it. Natalie had faded into the background like a shadow. I had outmaneuvered her, not with malice, but with careful planning, patience, and truth. I knew life would throw other challenges my way, but I also knew that I could handle betrayal, deceit, and manipulation. Nothing could take away the lessons I had learned. I walked into the next school year with confidence, a sense of control, and a clear understanding that boundaries are essential and that protecting yourself sometimes means being brave enough to face the person you once trusted the most. In that clarity, I found peace, and a strength I didn't know I had until I was forced to fight for it.